Good morning, Janice.
Good morning, Anthony.
Today we're going to talk about 3 lessons from a late solo ager. And when I say late, I mean she didn't know she was going to be a solo ager until late in life, right? So what happens if you become a solo ager later in life, and how does this happen? How does this affect you, the solo ager, toward the end of your life? And what are some of the consequences to your probate estate? So we're going to review Mrs. B's situation, we have anonymized, of course, and her final years and discuss. All right. All right. So first, you're probably wondering, how does somebody suddenly become a solo ager late in life? At least in Mrs. B's situation. So she was married with an adult daughter. Mm-hmm. So certainly not your typical solo ager. Everything seemed fine. And then the daughter moved to still in the U.S., but pretty far away. And they weren't fully estranged, but she was not really involved. The daughter was not much involved either. So let's just say effectively estranged, even though they stayed in touch and everything was friendly, but she just wasn't involved in her life. She wasn't there to monitor the care. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yep. Pretty far removed.
Yeah. And then here's the crux of it. Then the husband got sick and passed away faster than anyone expected. And I think we've both seen this in our personal lives. You just see it, right? It just happens.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You're never expecting it, right?
No.
So Mrs. B is suddenly, not only is she no longer has her husband partner, but she didn't, the adult daughter is just kind of not around. So, she didn't really have a solo ager plan set up because she didn't expect this to happen. Does that make sense?
Right.
She didn't have a support network established, and that happens. So
it does.
Yeah. All right. So then, how did Mrs. B end up with a court-appointed guardian or a court-appointed stranger? So since she was not ready to age alone, and we just mentioned she didn't have a plan or any team in place, and as kind of a downer, but as is common, when one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse kind of degrades pretty quickly. Have you seen that too, Janice?
Yeah, you have. I mean, especially in cases where you have people who've spent 50, 60, 70 years together. Yeah. It does change really quickly.
Yeah, and it's both mental and physical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, upon Mrs. B's first hospitalization, sadly, things like this happened. They were older. There was no one into whose care the hospital could release her. Right.
Right.
They don't always feel
home.
They're not always ready. The social worker at the hospital or whoever, they're not always prepared to just send you home. They ask, who do you live with? Who can help you, assist you with? And since her answer was, I live alone, she was kind of stuck. And she kind of got shuffled from the hospital to assisted living, or I think it was rehab, and then eventually to a nursing home. Yeah.
Yeah, they can't release you to the house because you might need some care. And
so when she was shuffled, eventually at the end of the shuffle, when she's in this nursing home, she's very understandably frustrated. Like she wants to go home, right? And so she was deemed uncooperative. Yes.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't, honestly, I wouldn't cooperate either, but that's just me.
Right. If you don't want to be there and you want to go home, you probably will be uncooperative.
So the nursing home petitioned the court to have a guardian appointed for her. Somebody, they didn't ask, can the daughter, I think they asked, but ultimately it was a court appointed guardian, an attorney she'd never met before from the court sort of Rolodex of attorneys who do this.
Yep.
And that's what she got. She got a court appointed stranger to be her guardian. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, he's nice. We've dealt with him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But, he had no prior relationship with Mrs. B. He didn't know what she wanted, didn't know her personality really. And it was basically his job to make sure that her wishes were carried out. And he didn't really know her wishes that well. I mean, it's not necessarily his fault.
No, they hadn't met before. It's not like they had a long-standing relationship where they would have the conversations. So, right.
I mean, and his job was to help her either hopefully get out, which unfortunately he was not able to do before she passed, and also there was this is kind of a downer, but they were trying to make her take all these meds she didn't want to take, and it was up to him to help her fend off the courts and the nursing home from compelling her to take these pills.
Right. That's a lot of pressure for a stranger. I mean, even though at that point they've met, that's a lot of pressure, right?
Anyway, not a great situation all around. I'm sure he did his best, and I'm sure Mrs. B tried her best to make the best of the situation. And of course, she eventually passed, as we all do. So why does having a court-appointed guardian make probate harder? I mean, you might not care what happens after you pass away, but if you're in a planning state of mind and you want to make sure your affairs are not a total mess, here's what happens. As with most guardianships, there's this sort of disjoin between the guardian who has control of the funds and the estate, which needs to get rolling and needs to take care of stuff. So what I mean by that is the guardian, upon Mrs. B's death, has this whole accounting procedure he has to do. Yeah. He has to make sure that he doesn't get in trouble for or he's released. Right. He needs to make sure the court approves of how he conducted himself during Mrs. B's life. So he needs to prepare all the records and all the financial documents to show the court, here's what I did. Here's the dollars I was controlling. Here's the dollars I spent. I spent it on, a wheelchair or, those vans that took her to rehab and so forth. Do you approve of how I conducted myself as guardian? Yes or no? Cool. Then the guardian gets released. Does that make sense?
It does. And you make it sound so simple, but it's a check register that could span a few years. I think when we saw a copy of it, it was pretty thick, right? Yeah. It's a lot. And, unfortunately with the guardians, these aren't their only clients. How many do you think they have?
Oh, dozens at least.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And so all this takes time, right? So he doesn't get started until after Mrs. B passes away. And we're talking months, if not years. So during those months and years, the executor or the heirs, in this case, me, the executor, we're stuck waiting. There's things we need to take care of that we can't, or it's harder to do because we don't know how much funds will be left in Mrs. B's estate because we have to receive those from the guardian and we don't have access to those funds.
Right.
So, for example, Mrs. B left an apartment that we needed to stop some leaks, stop some mold. Make some renovations just to get it ready for sale. And there were no funds because everything was in the guardian's possession. Again, not his fault. This is the procedure.
No. Yeah. Right.
So in our case, we had to do some creative bootstrapping. And I think we've talked about this in the past about what are some of the different ways to finance the estate if you don't have cash. I think that episode was what to do with an illiquid estate.
Yep.
Make sure we throw a link in there.
Yep. Got it.
But yeah, so we had to do one of those in bridge loans for an estate to stop the mold. That was the number one priority.
Right. And that was only going to get worse and more expensive.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that has liability issues for us to neighboring apartments and so forth.
Yes. Yep.
So how do you avoid this? It's better to have a revocable trust if you're even close to the situation. If you even suspect you're at the age or at the circumstance where a guardian might be required or forced on you, it's much better to have a revocable trust, which is where you basically choose a trustee who controls your funds or who manages your funds. So this is someone of your choosing, not a court-appointed stranger. So that's advantage number one. And advantage number two is that upon passing, it's a sort of a seamless transition from the same person is now managing your estate as was managing your guardianship during your life. So there's no bootstrap delay.
Right.
And just you kind of avoid the courts in general, which is always kind of a plus. Not always, but is often.
Often, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it. That covers Mrs. B's situation. Not the most fun story, but I think an important one so that folks understand, what can happen if you didn't expect to be a solo ager and it happens to you late in life. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, it can happen. We've seen it happen, like personally and professionally. There's a link down below in the comments, the Solo Ager Estate Plan, Anthony's book, that will help shed a little bit of light on this whole solo ager planning. And like you said, this happened later in life, but it can be fixed, right? Yeah. When they're later, yeah. So,
cool. All right. Well, hopefully this not so fun story helps some folks with their situations or get organized. And otherwise, thank you for listening. Janice, thanks for joining us as always, and we'll talk soon next time.
Talk soon.